my first feeding because of the added nutrients until I learned that the yeast hulls that they first off, they're not full yeast hulls. They've been sliced into very small bites. So think of us as humans trying to eat a basketball versus a plate full of shredded basketballs. So the manufacturer does two things that makes their, at least according to them, that makes their better than just plain yeast hulls. Number one, they're I can't think of the word right now, but they've been sliced into very, very thin bites, and so the yeast can assimilate it easier because of that. And then secondly, they gut load those yeast with all the nutrients that they used to say, yeast need thiamine and vitamin K and this and that. They actually gut load the yeast before they dry them out and then slice them up so that you're getting all of those things in the Go Firm yeast because they gut load them before they dry them out, and then they also cut them up into very small slices instead of making them full-on size, full-grown size yeast cells. And they actually considered using the Fermento along with the Go Firm as a unit, so that in doing so, that's then how you provide the yeast with all the micronutrients that we've known forever that they need to have.
Yeah, I mean, and as we all know that there's so much difference in how people are handling nutrient regimens and what people are using and what combinations. I mean, I've talked with probably 24 mead makers, both commercial and home about this, and I had 30 different protocols that were shared with me. I'm like, all right, so how are you simultaneously using two different protocols on your mead? Because somebody's got two different things that they do, and why they use it for one type of mead versus another is so much more empirical than anything else. We haven't studied it that well for the specific types of things that we're fermenting, but we're getting there. UC Davis has been doing some work on it, and some other meaderies. The work that Sergio's done with Tossin certainly makes a great statement that we're starting to convert that information into knowledge, where we can actually give people a repeatable process that makes some sense, that has some, real good science behind it that people could go, back things up with. Right. Like I said last week when I read, using an organic only nitrogen source at 1/3 break, and then for any later editions that I knew, but at 1/3 break they particularly called that out as having a distinct effect on aromatic production. No one had mentioned that to me before, and thinking if you're going to use inorganic nitrogen up to that point, but then switch from there on out, that you should see a big difference. I'm sure Sergio and others might be like, well, duh, we've been telling you about using organic nitrogen through the whole entire process. Oddly enough, the vendor of Fermento will tell you that they don't actually recommend using it that way. They have a slightly different process that they describe to you, which, believe it or not, actually has the organic product slotted in at the end in your last dosage. So guess what? They know what this article that I saw last week is hinting at. They just haven't decided to describe it that way. So you kind of triangulate all this stuff, realizing we're all talking about the same thing, but we're not all saying it the same way. So we don't realize that we're all on the same page. We're all doing it in different ways and getting different results and kind of honing in on the ones that are best.
I know for me that using just straight Fermento and nothing else, along with Go Firm, I've never made better meads, and until I'm happy with what I do until something comes along better enough that I'm, we'll move on to that. But it's proved very beneficial for me.
Yep. Yeah, I noticed we're talking about session meads and how quick they go. Yeah, I'm blowing through even like the third day and the 1/3 sugar break. I've collapsed it down into 3 doses so I can actually catch the third one, assuming that the yeast actually needs it. And I'm dosing it with a little bit of yeast hulls, right around 50% just to make sure it has a little bit of food to finish up. But this is all happening in the matter of like 3 days.
Yeah.
So fast.
Oftentimes I find myself not adding the fourth feeding because they don't need it.
Yeah.
They've flown past it and yep.
All right, so what else can we talk about before we have to go here? Because we've been talking for a little over 2 hours.
Actually, about almost 2.5 hours.
That always seems to happen when I'm on the show.
It does, yeah. This is all your fault, dude.
I'm going to start taking it personally. Yeah.
I know, right? Yeah, well, it's a good show.
It definitely is.
So, Jason, why don't you talk, as we've mentioned in passing, we need to have what I would say, just for ease of explanation, the 4 spokes of the wheel in some sort of a balance so that the wheel goes round and round, right? And that would be the sweet, the tart, the bitter, and the astringent. Do you want to talk about how to achieve a balance? Because, I've never made anything that just from the go I tossed in a bunch of crap in a bucket and let her rip, and it ended up with all those pieces in balance. In other words, almost all the time I buy just some, the best cider I can make, but I really say this tongue-in-cheek that I start with a crappy cider. Once it's done fermenting, now I have to go back with my juicer and I'll pick, a particular apple species to bring about, something lacking in one of those 4 spokes. Once I get that piece right, then I'll go chase down another piece until I get it together. Do you want to talk about that, and then maybe spice additions and how you go about that?
Sure. So I think what you just described is how, all of us are going to have to do this. And if you think about people that have kind of moved on to do, cyser or cider making commercially, they cut their teeth on a lot of experimentation and trying to figure out what fruit gives you what pieces of that puzzle. How much sweet do I get? How much acid do I get? How much, tannin do I get? And therefore, what do I have to do to interject on that? I mean, we haven't talked about tannins too much, so I'll jam on that one for a minute. In a cider blend that is predominantly eating or dessert apples, you're typically not going to get a lot of tannin out of that. The apples we're not bred for that. It's not as desirable of a component in a piece of fruit that you're going to pick up and just bite into. It's that it had that astringency, the fuzziness on the teeth and the textural component that tannins can create. And some cider apples are ridiculously tannic, so they
you can't even eat them.
Yeah, you can't eat them because that astringency is just so puckering and so unpleasant. So if you're working with these dessert apple, blend-based ciders, you're probably going to need some tannins to give them some complexity. So there's a couple things you can do. One we mentioned was go find some funky apples, crab apples or something like that when you take a bite of one, you're like, ooh, tannins, and boy, these are gross. I would not eat them. And throw those in your cider and let those tannins, get into the batch of cider. You'll notice a complexity in that mouthfeel that wasn't there previously, because now you've got another entrant to the game, as it were, trying to play its part. What I have found is, as you start to wade into territory where you're getting heirloom, vintage, and outright, sharps, bitter sharps, of these cider apple fruit, you're going to have to do less and less in all of these areas potentially, because those apples were designed for this particular purpose. So since most of us are getting these sweeter apples and blends that are predominantly this way, having a little bit of powdered grape tannin, which you can get it at homebrew shops. It's most commonly used for people who make wine, and for wines that are somehow deficient in tannin, or fruit wines. Most, again, eating fruit, strawberries, raspberries, don't have that. blueberries, blackberries do have quite a bit more tannin in them. So this is an area where you have to be careful about applying it broadly and saying all fruit wines need tannin. Not necessarily, depending on which fruit you're using. So having some powdered grape tannin around, and if you look at the application of that, you'll see people saying, quarter teaspoon for 5 gallons or half a teaspoon for 5 gallons. It's going to take a little bit of experimentation because it's going to be based on your perception of how much tannin is already in that particular cider. But that will definitely, help with that. So I see the question about tea. Tea will work as well. There are tannins in there. Don't forget the potential for wood. Oak tannins can most certainly play a part in this as well. You could get lightly toasted oak, where you're going to get a very gentle wood character to it, but you're going to get wood tannins. Where the darker toasted or the heavily toasted oak, you're going to get much, much more of a profound impact from it, as well as the tannins. But the lighter ones, you're going to get less of that profound aroma and flavor from it, but you'll also get some of the wood tannins as well. Those tannins are different than the grape tannins too, which if you think about red wine, barrel-aged red wine, the tannins in that finished product are a combination of grape tannins and wood tannins. And they're different. They perceived differently. I have no way to describe how, because I don't really think I understand that as well as I probably will in time. But they're compatible. They work. They complementary to each other in being able to create some tannins. So, how to hone in on the balance of those things? It's an experimentation. This is where I tell people that we're racing towards trying to make beverage making much more systematized and scientific, and we see that on many of the Facebook groups around this, that we're trying to be very modern and contemporary with what we're doing and drive people to learn their textbook technique and have all of these various tools at our disposal. Of the day, you really have to sharpen your senses. You absolutely positively have to sharpen your senses. If you don't think you understand how to perceive tannins, you got to spend some time trying to figure it out, because you'll never be able to figure out what the balance is there if you don't know what the sensory cue is for it. And it's the same way with sugar and acid. If you're kind of just being not even remotely mindful of things that you eat, and understanding, I actually like this because I like it's nice and tart. That's acidity. What kind of acidity? And how much is it? I mean, think about how, acetic acid and vinegar. We all have a sense of that, but that one is very profound. When you get a salad dressing that's got a lot of vinegar in it, you'd big surprise that acidity is part of the equation. But when you're looking at a less obvious expression of acidity, if you're not confident that you're able to really pick that out, you're going to be challenged to create balance, because your senses are not really helping you, and there's no good measurement to tell you exactly how much acidity is the right amount. pH isn't going to tell you. You can titrate. That's not going to tell you. It's going to tell you how much of certain things are in there, or what their measurement is on a spectrum, but it's still not going to tell you that in those quantities, is it pleasant?
Won't mean crap.
Yeah. You got to put it in your mouth and be like, okay, yeah, that tastes good. Or no, it doesn't. Like, okay, well, why? So that's where you got to put those two things together. What does the measurement tell me? If the pH is ridiculously low, and then you put it in your mouth, you're like, holy crap. Now you know why, because it's got too much acid in it. You need to sweeten it up. Or if the pH is 4 something or 5 something, if you for whatever reason able to get it up that high, and it's also sweet and you taste it, and it's just like, wow, this is just not. It's so flabby and it just doesn't really pop. There's no pucker in the mouth. It's just all sugar. Now you've actually been able to determine that the pH meter is telling you that there's not enough acid in it, and now you know what that actually tastes like, and now you can work to add acid back to it, and calibrate your taste to the pH meter. And with the acid sugar balance, and it's kind of weird because it had been a while since I had actually used this